If you pass through Lexington, Missouri today, you'll hear stories about the old church on Miller's Ridge, the one with the empty bell tower that ain't rung since the winter of '63. The old folks there, the ones who remember, they'll tell you that church is cursed. They'll tell you about the day Bloody Bill Anderson hanged a Union captain from that bell tower and how the rope's still up there, weathered and grey, 'cause nobody's got the stones to climb up and cut it down. They say on quiet nights you can still hear the bell tolling, even though there ain't no bell no more. But what they don't tell strangers, what they only whisper amongst themselves, is that the captain had it coming. He'd forced a woman to marry him in that very church, held her children's lives over her head like a loaded gun. And when Bill Anderson heard about it, well, hell itself came riding into Lexington on horseback. The Missouri-Kansas border in late '63 was a killing ground, plain and simple. Weren't no law out there except what a man could enforce with a gun. Union forces occupied the towns, but they weren't there to keep peace. They was there to punish. Confederate families got their farms burned, their livestock stolen, their menfolk hanged from trees for the crime of being Southern. Jayhawkers and redlegs rode through like locusts, taking what they wanted and burning what they didn't. The countryside was scarred black with the ash of homesteads, and every creek seemed to hide another unmarked grave. Women and old folks lived in fear, never knowing if today was the day some blue-coated bastard would decide they was harboring guerrillas or hiding supplies. The only protection folks had was men like Bill Anderson and his band, and they was protection bought with blood. Now listen here. This story gets darker than a Kansas cyclone. Hit that like button and subscribe if you ain't already, 'cause what Anderson done to that captain, well, you won't believe it till you hear it told. Don't go nowhere. Bill Anderson rode the border like the angel of death himself, and that weren't no poetic talk. It was simple truth. He was 24 years old that winter, but his eyes was old as the hills, cold and flat as river stones. His sisters had died in a Kansas City building collapse, murdered, far as Bill was concerned, by Union forces who'd imprisoned them there. After that, something in Bill just went cold and hard. He wore their ribbons braided into his horse's mane, and every Union man he killed was payment on a debt that could never be settled. His saddlebags carried scalps. His reputation carried terror. The band that rode with him was bound by blood and shared grief. Little Archie Clement was small as a boy but mean as a cornered rattler, absolutely loyal to Bill, and faster with a gun than seemed natural. The James brothers rode with them, Jesse, young and still wrestling with what he was becoming, and Frank, the thinker who planned their raids with the precision of a chess player. Cole Younger was there too, smooth-talking and educated, but don't let that fool you. He could kill you 6 ways before you hit the ground. Jim Anderson, Bill's own brother, shared the family's hunger for vengeance, and Dave Poole, silent as smoke, who never questioned an order and never missed a shot. They was all Southern boys who'd seen their families destroyed, their homes burned, their women violated by men hiding behind Union commissions. They'd learned the hard way that law and justice was 2 different things entirely, and in Missouri during the war, there weren't no justice at all, just survival and vengeance. Captain Marcus Harding represented everything wrong with the occupation. Before the war, he'd been nothing, a failed merchant from Kansas who couldn't make $1 selling water in a drought. But the war gave men like him opportunity, and a Union commission gave him authority he'd never earned and couldn't handle. He wore that blue uniform like a crown, used his rank like a club, and saw Confederate families as nothing more than obstacles between him and their property. Harding had a system worked out real neat. He'd accuse Southern families of harboring guerrillas or failing to pledge loyalty, then seize their farms for unpaid taxes or military necessity. Didn't matter that most of these families had paid every cent they owed, or that their only crime was being born south of the line. Harding took what he wanted, and his superiors looked the other way, because he kept the area pacified and sent regular reports that made them look good. By late 63, Harding had claimed a dozen farms, each one more profitable than the last. But profit weren't enough for Marcus Harding. He wanted respectability too, wanted to be seen as a proper gentleman instead of the land-thieving coward he was. And that's when he set his eyes on Sarah Anderson. Sarah was Bill Anderson's cousin, a widow of 26, whose husband had died at Wilson's Creek, fighting for the Confederacy. She had 2 boys, ages 8 and 6, and a farm outside Lexington that her family had built from nothing. Good bottomland near the Missouri River, a sturdy house, productive fields. Sarah had kept that farm running through 2 years of war, working herself near to death to keep her boys fed and her land from being seized. She was a handsome woman, strong and proud, with the kind of dignity that came from honest work and clear conscience. Harding decided that farm and Sarah would be his. It was a cold morning in November when Harding rode up to Sarah's place with 10 soldiers. Sarah was in the yard, hanging laundry that steamed in the freezing air. Her boys was inside, doing their lessons at the kitchen table. Harding didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, still mounted, looking down at her like she was dirt, "I have evidence you've been providing aid and comfort to guerrilla forces, specifically to the outlaw Bill Anderson." Sarah's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "That's a damn lie, Captain. I ain't seen Bill in over a year, and I wouldn't help guerrillas even if I could. I got children to protect." Harding smiled, and it was the smile of a man holding all the cards. "I have witnesses prepared to testify otherwise. The penalty for such treason is death. But in your case, I'm willing to show mercy." He paused, making sure his men was listening. "Your husband's dead. Your farm needs a man's hand. Marry me and these charges disappear. Your boys grow up with a father. You keep your land." Sarah's hands, still holding wet laundry, started shaking. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious, Mrs. Anderson. You have until Sunday to decide. That's 4 days. If you refuse, I'll hang your boys from that oak tree yonder for the crime of being raised by a guerrilla sympathizer. Then I'll take the farm anyway, and you'll have nothing, not even your children." He wasn't bluffing. Sarah could see it in his eyes, hear it in the casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather. This was a man who'd done worse and slept fine afterward. "Sunday," Harding repeated. "We'll have the ceremony at the church your family built. Fitting, don't you think? The whole town can witness your loyalty to the Union." Then he rode off, leaving Sarah standing in her yard, laundry forgotten, her whole world crashing down around her. She had 4 days to save her children's lives, and only one way to do it. Sarah Anderson didn't sleep them 4 nights. She'd sit by her boys' beds, watching them breathe, knowing that come Sunday she had to choose between her body and their lives. She thought about running, but where would she go? Harding had men watching the roads. She thought about fighting, but she was one woman against 10 armed soldiers. She thought about killing herself after the wedding, but then who'd raise her boys? By Saturday night she'd made her choice. Her children would live, no matter what it cost her. Sunday morning came cold and bright. Harding arrived at her farm with his full detail, all of them cleaned up and wearing their dress uniforms like this was some kind of celebration. He'd brought a preacher too, Reverend Collins from town, a nervous little man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Time to go, Mrs. Anderson," Harding said, still on his horse, still looking down at her. "Put on your best dress, we're getting married." Sarah looked at her boys, kissed them both, and told them to be brave. Then she changed into the same dress she'd worn when she married her first husband, the only good dress she owned. It felt like blasphemy, wearing it for this. The church on Miller's Ridge was the one Sarah's grandfather had helped build, back when Lexington was barely more than a trading post. It was small and plain, whitewashed wood with a bell tower that could be heard for miles around. Sarah had been baptized there, married there, buried her husband from there. It was sacred ground to her family. Harding was about to defile it. The town folks was already gathered when Harding's detail brought Sarah and her boys in. Most of them looked at their feet, ashamed but too scared to speak up. A few of the women was crying quietly. Everyone knew what was happening, and everyone knew it was wrong, but weren't nobody willing to stand up to a Union captain with 10 armed men. Harding stood at the altar, grinning like he'd won something valuable. Reverend Collins stood beside him, sweating despite the cold, his hands shaking as he held his Bible. "Let's begin," Harding said. He nodded to 2 soldiers who grabbed Sarah's boys and held them at the back of the church, a reminder of what would happen if Sarah refused. The ceremony was a mockery. Reverend Collins stumbled through the words, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stood rigid as a corpse, her face blank, her eyes fixed on her sons. When Collins asked if she took this man as her lawful husband, she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "She said yes," Harding announced. "I heard it clear as day. Continue, Reverend." Collins looked at Sarah, saw the tears running down her face, and kept reading. When he got to the part about kissing the bride, Harding grabbed Sarah's face and forced his mouth on hers. Some of his soldiers laughed. The townspeople looked away. "There," Harding said, releasing Sarah. "All legal and proper. Mrs. Harding now." He looked at the congregation. "You all witnessed it. This woman is now under my protection as my lawful wife. Anyone who says otherwise is calling the Union Army and the church liars." He rang the church bell himself, 20 loud clangs that echoed across Lexington, announcing his victory to the whole county. That night, Harding took Sarah back to her own farm, his farm now, he made sure to tell her, and consummated the marriage while his men stood guard outside. Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about her boys sleeping in the next room, and told herself she was keeping them alive. That was all that mattered. She could survive anything if it meant her children lived. But surviving weren't the same as living, and Sarah knew she was dying inside, piece by piece. Every day she woke up next to the man who'd forced her into this. Word of what happened spread fast through the Missouri countryside, the way news always did in wartime. Carried by refugees, whispered in markets, passed along by sympathetic preachers and traveling merchants. Stories like that had a way of reaching the people who needed to hear them most. 3 weeks after the forced wedding, a circuit-riding Methodist preacher who'd been at the ceremony made his way south into guerrilla country. He was a Southern sympathizer, had been feeding information to Confederate forces since the war started, and he knew Bill Anderson by reputation. When he finally tracked down Anderson's camp in the hills south of Lexington, he asked to speak with Bill, personal-like. Bill was cleaning his revolvers when the preacher was brought to him. "Make it quick," Bill said without looking up. "We're moving at dawn." "It's about your cousin Sarah," the preacher said. Bill's hands stopped moving. He looked up, his face blank as stone. "What about Sarah?" "Captain Marcus Harding forced her to marry him, threatened to hang her boys if she refused. Made her do it in the church her own grandfather built. I was there. I performed the ceremony with a gun to my back." The preacher's voice shook. "I'm sorry, Bill. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to refuse, but I thought you should know." The camp went dead quiet. Every man there knew that look on Bill's face, the absolute emptiness that came before the storm. Little Archie stopped sharpening his knife. Frank James stood up slowly. Jesse's hand drifted toward his gun, though there weren't no threat present. "Tell me everything," Bill said, his voice flat as a frozen pond. "Every detail. Don't leave nothing out." The preacher talked for near an hour, describing the forced marriage, Harding's threats, Sarah's tears, the bell ringing out across Lexington. He told Bill about the 10 soldiers Harding kept at the farm, about how he'd seized the property and claimed it as his own, about how he paraded Sarah through town on his arm like she was a prize he'd won. When the preacher finished, Bill sat silent for a long time. Then he said, "Archie, get the maps. Frank, I need you to plan a route to Lexington. Cole, find out everything you can about this Captain Harding, where he goes, when he goes, who rides with him." He stood up, and every man in camp stood with him. "Jesse, make sure every gun we got is clean and loaded." "We hitting the farm?" Jim Anderson asked. He was Bill's brother, and he looked ready to ride right then. "No," Bill said. "He married her in a church. He'll answer for it in that same church. He looked at each of his men in turn. Harding thinks that Union Commission makes him untouchable. He thinks he can force a woman to marry him and face no consequences. He's wrong. I'm going to teach him what happens when you touch a bushwhacker's family. When do we ride? Little Archie asked. Bill's smile was colder than a January frost. Soon. But first we plan this right. Harding's going to die slow, and he's going to die public, and everyone in Lexington's going to watch it happen. They watched him force Sarah to marry. They're going to watch him pay for it. The guerrillas set about preparing with the grim efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times before. But this time was different. This weren't just another raid. This was family. This was personal. And Captain Marcus Harding had just become a dead man walking. Bill Anderson didn't do nothing on impulse. That's what separated him from the common killers and barn-burners. He planned every move like a general, thought 3 steps ahead, and never left nothing to chance. For 2 weeks, he sent men into Lexington disguised as drifters, peddlers, and farmers looking for work. They watched Harding's movements, counted his guards, mapped every road in and out of town. They learned that Harding kept 10 soldiers at Sarah's farm, but only took 4 with him when he went to town. They learned he was getting jumpy, hearing rumors about Anderson asking questions. Most important, they learned Harding went to church every Sunday morning without fail, had to maintain appearances, show the town he was a respectable man, and not the land-thieving coward everyone knew he was. Frank James spread maps across a flat rock in their camp, marking routes and timing. If we hit him at the farm, we risk Sarah and the boys getting caught in the crossfire, he said. Too many variables, too much that can go wrong. The church then, Bill said. Sunday service, whole town will be there. Cole Younger frowned. That means innocents, Bill. Folks who ain't got nothing to do with this. They watched him force Sarah to marry, Bill said, his voice cold. They did nothing. But we'll give them a chance to leave before it gets bloody. He looked at Cole. I ain't killing innocents. Just the guilty. And Harding's men? Jesse asked. They chose to ride with him. They're part of it. Bill traced a line on the map. We go in before dawn Sunday, hide amongst the congregation. When Harding arrives, we take him. His men die if they fight. Simple as that. But Bill weren't content to just wait for Sunday. He wanted Harding scared, wanted him looking over his shoulder, wanted him to know death was coming but not know when or how. So he started a campaign of terror that would have made the devil himself proud. First, one of Harding's supply wagons disappeared on the road from Kansas City. The driver and 2 guards was found 3 days later, scalped and mutilated, with a note pinned to the driver's chest. You took what weren't yours. I'm taking it back. Then a patrol of 5 soldiers sent to investigate never came back. Their bodies turned up scattered along the Lexington road, each one bearing the marks of Anderson's particular brand of brutality. Scalped, throats cut, left for the buzzards. Another note, this one written in blood on a piece of cloth. She didn't want to marry you. Harding started losing sleep. He doubled the guards at the farm, stopped his regular trips to town except for Sundays, and sent urgent messages to his superiors requesting reinforcements. But reinforcements was slow coming. The Union Army had bigger problems than one captain's paranoia, and besides, most officers figured Harding had probably earned whatever Anderson had planned for him. The third strike was the boldest. One night someone slipped past Harding's guards and left a piece of Sarah's wedding dress nailed to the farmhouse door. It was soaked in blood, animal blood, but Harding didn't know that, with a message carved into the door itself. Same church, same rope, soon. Harding near had a breakdown when he found it. He knew then with absolute certainty that bloody Bill Anderson was coming for him, and there weren't nothing he could do to stop it. He thought about running, but where would he go? Anderson's reputation stretched from Missouri to Kansas and back. The man was relentless, methodical, and absolutely merciless. Running would just mean dying tired. Sarah saw the fear in her husband's eyes and felt something like hope for the first time in weeks. She didn't know if Bill would really come, but the possibility that Harding might pay for what he'd done gave her strength to endure another day. Inside the guerrilla camp, the men prepared with quiet efficiency. They cleaned their revolvers until the metal shone, sharpened their knives, checked their powder and shot. Little Archie was near giddy with anticipation. He loved killing Union men, and this one deserved it more than most. Jesse was quieter, thoughtful, still wrestling with the violence he was becoming accustomed to. Frank laid out the plan one more time, making sure every man knew his position, his role, what to do if things went sideways. "We ride Saturday night," Bill announced. "Get to Lexington before dawn Sunday. We split up, come into town from different directions so we don't draw attention. We'll be in the church before Harding even knows we're there." "What about the townsfolk?" Cole asked again. He was the one who always asked the hard questions. "I'll give them a chance to leave," Bill said. "But Harding dies in that church in front of God and everybody. He forced Sarah to marry him there, threatened her children there, defiled sacred ground. He's going to answer for it in the same place." "And if some of them won't leave?" Dave Poole asked, speaking for the first time that night. Bill's expression didn't change. "Then they'll see what justice looks like. Hold on now. Make sure you like this video. What's coming next is the reckoning, and it ain't pretty." Anderson's about to deliver hell itself, right there in that church. Saturday night came cold and clear, stars bright as diamonds in a black sky. Bill's guerrillas rode out in small groups, taking different routes to Lexington, planning to arrive separately so as not to raise alarm. They was dressed like farmers and townsfolk, their weapons hidden under long coats, their faces showing nothing but Sunday morning piety. Bill rode with Frank and Jesse, taking the long way around through the hills. They didn't talk much. There weren't nothing left to say. They all knew what was coming, knew it would be brutal and bloody and final. Jesse kept his hand on his revolver, feeling its weight, wondering if he'd have to use it on civilians. Frank kept running through the plan in his head, looking for weaknesses, finding none. Bill just rode, his face blank, his mind on Sarah and what she'd endured, on Harding and what he was about to pay. They reached Lexington just before dawn and split up, each man finding a place to wait until church time. Bill slipped into the church itself, hiding in the bell tower where he could watch the town wake up. From up there, he could see Harding's guards patrolling, nervous and jumpy. He could see the farmhouse where Sarah was imprisoned. He could see the whole town spread out below him, peaceful and quiet, not knowing that in a few hours blood would soak the floorboards of their church. The sun rose slow and red, like it was bleeding into the sky. Church bells started ringing across Lexington, all except the one Bill was standing under. He jammed the mechanism so it couldn't ring. When that bell rang again, it would be for one purpose only. People started gathering at the church around 9 o'clock, families in their Sunday best, acting like everything was normal. Bill's men filtered in among them, taking positions throughout the pews, weapons concealed but ready. Little Archie sat in the back, grinning like a choir boy. Cole Younger was in the middle, looking respectable and calm. Frank and Jesse was near the front. Dave Poole stood by the door. Bill descended from the bell tower and took a seat in the very front pew, right where Sarah would have sat when she was forced to marry. He wore a long coat that hid his revolvers, and his face was calm as Sunday morning. At 9:30, Harding's detail arrived. The captain came through the door with Sarah on his arm and 4 guards surrounding them. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes darting around constantly. Sarah looked worse, pale and hollow-eyed, like a ghost of herself. Her boys walked behind them, quiet and scared. Harding walked Sarah down the aisle toward the front pew, and that's when he saw him, bloody Bill Anderson, sitting calm as you please in the front row, looking right at him. Harding froze. His face went white. His hand went for his pistol, and Bill smiled. Time seemed to stop right there in that church. Harding's hand was on his pistol, but he couldn't move, couldn't draw, couldn't run, couldn't do nothing but stare at the man who'd come to kill him. Bill Anderson sat relaxed as a cat in sunshine, his hands resting easy on his knees, no weapon visible. But his eyes was flat and cold, and Harding knew with absolute certainty that he was looking at death itself. "Captain Harding," Bill said, his voice carrying clear through the silent church, "you forced my cousin to marry you in this church. Today, you'll answer for it in this church." Harding's guards finally reacted, going for their weapons, but they was too slow and too late. Guerrillas rose from every pew like ghosts coming to life. Little Archie shot the first guard through the head before the man cleared leather. Dave Poole dropped the second with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. Frank James put 2 bullets in the third guard's chest. The fourth tried to run and made it 3 steps before Cole Younger shot him in the back. 4 men dead in less than 5 seconds. The gunfire was deafening in the closed space, smoke filling the air, the smell of powder sharp and bitter. Women screamed, men shouted, children cried. It was chaos and terror, and the sudden understanding that something terrible was happening. Bill stood up slow, drawing both his revolvers, and the chaos stopped. Every eye in that church fixed on him. Sarah grabbed her boys and pulled them close, her face showing hope and fear in equal measure. "Everybody listen here," Bill said, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is between me and the captain. Ain't nobody else needs to die today. So I'm giving you one chance. Get out. Take your families and go. Right now." Nobody moved at first, too scared to think straight. Then Reverend Collins stumbled toward the door, and that broke the spell. People started running, pushing and shoving to get out, desperate to escape before the killing started again. In less than a minute, the church was empty, except for Bill's guerrillas, Sarah and her boys, and Captain Marcus Harding. "Sarah," Bill said, not taking his eyes off Harding, "take your boys outside. Wait with the horses." "Bill," she started, "go on now. This ain't something your boys need to see." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. She kissed Bill's cheek as she passed, the first human touch he'd allowed himself in months, and led her children out into the cold morning air. The door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Now it was just Bill, his men, and the captain. Harding found his voice finally, though it came out high and trembling. "You can't do this. I'm a Union officer. Killing me is..." "Is what?" Bill interrupted. "Treason? Murder? Hell, Captain, I done been called worse things than a murderer. But what you done, forcing a woman to marry you, threatening to kill her children, using your commission to terrorize folks who can't fight back, that's something special. That's evil wearing a uniform." "I'll give you money," Harding said, desperation making his voice crack. "I got property, land, gold. Take it all. Just let me go. I'll leave Missouri, never come back." Bill walked toward him slow, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "You made vows in this church, Captain, remember? Till death do us part. I'm here to make sure you keep them." Harding tried to run then, pure panic overriding any sense. He made it 5 steps before little Archie stuck out a foot and tripped him. Harding went down hard, cracking his chin on a pew, blood spraying from his mouth. He tried to crawl, whimpering now, all dignity gone. Jesse James grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "Please," Harding begged, tears and blood running down his face. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll do anything, anything." "Too late for sorry," Bill said. "You had chances to be a decent man. You chose different. Now you pay the price." Bill nodded to his men. They dragged Harding to the front of the church, right where he'd stood when he forced Sarah to marry him. Harding was crying openly now, begging, promising things he couldn't deliver. His bladder letting go so piss ran down his legs. All the arrogance, all the power, all the cruelty. It was gone, replaced by pure animal terror. "You remember what you done here?" Bill asked, his voice conversational, like they was discussing the weather. "You forced a woman to marry you, threatened her children, made her say vows she didn't mean. Then you rang that bell up there, announcing your victory to the whole county." "I'm sorry," Harding screamed. "God, I'm sorry, I was wrong." "Yeah, you was wrong. And now you're going to be dead." Bill looked up at the bell tower. "Frank, get the rope. The same one Harding used to threaten Sarah's boys. It's in my saddlebag." Frank returned a minute later with a coil of hemp rope, thick and rough. Bill took it, feeling the weight, then looked at Harding with something like satisfaction. "How threatened to hang children with this rope? Now it's going to hang you." "No!" Harding tried to fight as they dragged him toward the tower stairs, but he was weak with fear, his legs barely holding him. "No, please! God, no!" They hauled him up the narrow stairs to the bell tower, Harding screaming and begging the whole way. The tower was small, barely room for 3 men, with the church bell hanging silent in its frame. The mechanism that rang it was right there. A wheel and rope system that let someone below pull the bell to life. Bill tied one end of the rope around Harding's neck, pulling it tight, then threaded the other end through the bell's mechanism. It was perfect. Every time the bell moved, it would jerk Harding's body, just like every clang had once announced his forced marriage. "You rang this bell when you married Sarah," Bill said, his face inches from Harding's. "Now this bell's gonna ring for you." "Please," Harding whispered, his voice gone hoarse from screaming. "I'm begging you." "Sarah begged too. Her boys begged. You didn't listen." Bill stepped back. "Archie, Jesse, throw him out." They grabbed Harding and pushed him toward the tower window. Harding grabbed at the frame, his fingers slipping on the wood, his screams echoing across Lexington. Then they shoved him hard, and he went out into empty air. The rope snapped tight with a sound like a gunshot. Harding's neck didn't break. Bill had made sure of that, tying the knot so it would strangle slow instead of killing quick. Harding's body jerked and twisted at the end of the rope, his legs kicking, his hands clawing at his throat. Horrible choking sounds coming from his crushed windpipe. Bill walked back down to the church floor, his men following. Through the window they could see Harding hanging there, still alive, still struggling, his face turning purple. Bill grabbed the bell rope, the one that rang the bell from below, and pulled it hard. The bell tolled once, loud and clear, and Harding's body jerked violently as the mechanism moved. His scream was cut off by the rope tightening further. Bill pulled again. The bell tolled a second time. Harding jerked again, spinning at the end of the rope. "How many times did this bell ring when you married Sarah?" Bill asked nobody in particular. "I'm thinking it was 20 times. He pulled the rope again, and again, and again. Each toll of the bell jerked Harding's dying body like a puppet on strings. The sound carried across Lexington, and folks came out of their houses to see what was happening. They saw Captain Marcus Harding hanging from the church tower, dancing at the end of a rope while the bell rang out his execution. By the 10th toll, Harding had stopped moving. By the 15th, his face was black and swollen, his tongue hanging out, his eyes bulged near out of their sockets. By the 20th toll, he was definitely dead. But Bill kept ringing anyway, making sure everyone in town heard it, making sure they understood what happened to men who forced women to marry them. Finally, Bill released the rope. The bell went silent. Harding's body hung limp and still, turning slowly in the cold wind. Bill walked to the church door and stepped out into the sunlight. The townspeople was gathered there watching, their faces showing shock and fear and, in some cases, satisfaction. Sarah stood with her boys, tears running down her face, but she was smiling. "Captain Harding forced my cousin to marry him in that church," Bill announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Threatened to kill her children if she refused. Used his commission to terrorize a defenseless woman. So I hanged him from the same bell that rang at his forced wedding. Let this be a lesson to every Union officer in Missouri. You touch a bushwhacker's family, and this is what happens. You defile a church, you die in that church. Simple as that." He walked to Sarah, took her hand. "You're free now. Take your boys. Go to your family in Arkansas. The farm's burned. I won't let Harding's corruption taint it. But you're free." Sarah threw her arms around him, sobbing, "Thank you. Thank you." Bill held her for a moment, then gently pushed her away. "Go on now. Get out of Missouri. It ain't safe for you here no more." He mounted his horse, and his guerrillas did the same. They rode out of Lexington slow and easy, like they had all the time in the world. Behind them, Captain Marcus Harding's body swung from the church tower, a warning and a promise to anyone who thought about following in his footsteps. The bell rope hung beside him, still swaying slightly from Bill's last pull. Nobody would cut that body down for 3 days, and nobody would ever ring that bell again. The guerrillas rode hard after leaving Lexington, putting miles between themselves and Harding's body before any Union reinforcements could arrive. They didn't stop until they reached their camp in the hills south of town, where they dismounted and saw to their horses in silence. What they'd done in that church, it weren't like their usual raids. This had been personal, and every man felt the weight of it different. Jesse James sat cleaning his revolver, his hands moving automatic while his mind worked through what he'd witnessed. He was young still, barely 20, and though he'd killed men before, there was something about watching Harding hang that stuck with him. The captain had deserved it. Jesse had no doubt about that. But the sound of that bell ringing, the way Harding's body jerked with each toll, the screams cut short by the rope. It was going to stay with Jesse for a long time. "You all right, boy?" Frank asked, sitting down beside his brother. "Yeah," Jesse said, though he weren't sure it was true. "Just thinking. That captain, he had it coming, didn't he?" "He did," Frank said without hesitation. "Man who forces a woman to marry him, threatens children, uses his authority like that. Hell yes, he had it coming. Don't doubt that." "I don't," Jesse said. "I just wonder sometimes what we're becoming. If there's a line we ain't supposed to cross." Frank was quiet a moment, then said, "War makes men cross lines they never thought they would. But there's still a difference between us and them. We protect our own. They destroy for profit and pleasure. That line's still there, Jesse, long as we remember why we're doing this." Across the camp, Bill Anderson sat alone, staring into the fire. He'd avenged Sarah, delivered justice for her suffering, but he felt no satisfaction, just the cold certainty that this was what he was now, what the war had made him, an instrument of vengeance, nothing more and nothing less. His sisters were still dead, his family was still scattered, and tomorrow there'd be another wrong to right, another score to settle. It never ended. Little Archie walked over, grinning like always. "That was something, Bill. The way you hanged him from his own bell, that'll be talked about for years." "Good," Bill said. "Let them talk. Let every Union officer in Missouri hear about it. Maybe they'll think twice before touching another Confederate family." And word did spread fast and wide. By the next day, every town on the border knew about Captain Harding hanging from the Lexington church tower. The story got embellished with each telling. Some said Bill had made Harding ring the bell himself. Others claimed the ghost of Sarah's first husband had appeared in the church. But the core truth remained. Bloody Bill Anderson had executed a Union officer for forcing a woman to marry him, and he'd done it in the same church where the crime occurred. Union commanders was furious. They issued orders for Anderson's capture, doubled the bounty on his head, sent out patrols to hunt him down. But they also quietly passed word to their officers. Don't force marriages, don't threaten children, don't give Anderson a reason to come for you. The brass weren't fools. They knew Harding had brought his death on himself, and they didn't want more officers hanging from church towers. The townspeople of Lexington left Harding's body hanging for 3 days before Union soldiers finally arrived to cut it down. By then the buzzards had been at him, and the sight was gruesome enough that folks avoided looking at the church tower. They buried him quick and quiet, no ceremony, no marker. Within a week, it was like Captain Marcus Harding had never existed, except for that empty bell tower and the rope still hanging from the mechanism. Reverend Collins tried to hold services the next Sunday, but nobody came. The church felt cursed, tainted by violence and death. Eventually, Collins gave up and moved to Kansas. The church stood empty after that, windows broken, doors hanging open, the bell tower silent. Locals said you could hear screaming on quiet nights, or the sound of a bell that weren't there no more. Whether that was true or just fear talking, nobody wanted to find out. Sarah Anderson made it safely to Arkansas with her boys, traveling under an assumed name with money Bill had given her. She settled with distant relatives and eventually remarried. A good man this time, a farmer who treated her decent and raised her boys like they was his own. She never talked much about what happened in Missouri, but her grandchildren would later say that sometimes on Sunday mornings she'd start crying for no reason she could explain. The sound of church bells always made her flinch. Years after the war ended, when Jesse James was running with his own gang, a reporter asked him about Bloody Bill Anderson. Jesse thought for a long moment, then said, "Bill was the hardest man I ever knew. Mean as hell when he needed to be, but he had a code. He protected his own, punished those who hurt the helpless. I seen him do terrible things, but I also seen him do necessary things. That day at the Lexington church, that was both terrible and necessary." The reporter asked if Bill had gone too far. Jesse's answer was simple. "You'd have to ask Captain Harding. Oh wait, you can't. He's hanging from a church bell in hell." The hanging at Lexington became part of Anderson's legend, one more story in the brutal folklore of the border war. It reinforced what people already believed, that Bill Anderson was a demon in human form, that he protected Confederate families with absolute ruthlessness, and that crossing him meant death, public, humiliating, inevitable death. But it also sent a different message, one that resonated with the folks living under Union occupation, that there was someone who would stand up for them, who would answer injustice with justice, who wouldn't let authority figures abuse their power without consequence. Bill Anderson might be brutal, might be merciless, might be half crazy with grief and rage, but he was on their side, and in a war where nobody else seemed to care about Confederate families, that mattered. The church on Miller's Ridge still stands today over 160 years later. It's been restored, serves a small congregation again, even has a new bell in the tower. But if you ask the old folks in Lexington about its history, they'll tell you about Captain Harding and Bloody Bill Anderson and the day justice came to town on horseback. They'll tell you that some debts can only be paid in blood, and some crimes can only be answered with rope and a church bell. And they'll tell you that the original bell rope is still there, coiled up in a museum in town, with a small plaque that reads, "From the Lexington Church Tower, 1863. They don't explain what it was used for, don't need to. Anyone from Missouri knows the story. On the border, marriage is sacred and family is everything. Captain Marcus Harding defiled both, and Bloody Bill Anderson made him pay the price in the very church where he committed his sin. That's the lesson, simple and brutal as the man who taught it. Touch a bushwhacker's family, and you'll hang from your own church bell. Well, there you have it, folks. Subscribe if you ain't already. And tell me down in the comments, where you watching from and what you think about what Anderson done. Was it justice or did he go too far? Let's hear it. The wind still blows cold across Lexington, Missouri. The church still stands on Miller's Ridge. And somewhere in the Missouri soil, unmarked and forgotten, lies Captain Marcus Harding, a man who learned too late that authority ain't the same as power, and that some men don't forgive, don't forget, and don't stop until the debt is paid in full. Bloody Bill Anderson made sure of that.